This is a story of Elwood. It is an absolutely true story. It started with me teaching at New Trier High School, a summer school class in biology. And a couple of days into the class, one of my students brought me a box, a shoebox, and it said, can you take care of this? And the mother is dead. And so I'm expecting a dead mother of something when I opened up the box. But what I found were two baby blue jays, chirping, and begging for food and hungry. And they were obviously males. They were obviously brothers. And since they were blue and brothers, the names Jake and Elwood came to mind. And so I named the taller, thinner one Elwood and the shorter, heavier one Jake. And they became a classroom project. The students in my summer school class went on internet. We looked up while we could about feeding baby birds with the intention of making them whole and then releasing them. We ended up having to feed them cat food or dog food. I wasn't willing to chew up insects and regurgitate them into their mouths, so we would put little bits of cat food on the tip of your finger and then shove it down their throat, and they would gobble it up. They needed to eat about every 2 hours, and they would quiet down a little bit, and then every 2 hours they would start chirping and demanding some more food. I went down to the basement of the school and I found a cage, and I got a cover. That didn't really help much. So every 2 hours they were chirping away and demanding food. So we ended up having to teach them how to perch, how to fly, how to go from one desk to another. We would hold their feet and drop them, and then their wings would go out automatically and build up their wing muscles. They really were demanding, but really a wonderful trip to try and figure out how to help them and save them and so on. But it was really a problem in terms of the constant chirping. I had to bring them home, and my wife wasn't real happy about that, so I put them in our back bedroom that I used as an office, and they would chirp all night long. Well, one day I was going to a meeting of the Illinois Biology Teachers Association, and on the way there, of course, I had the birds in the car. My car started overheating, and so I had to pull off to the side of the road and take care of that. When I drive, I often, almost always, listen to some kind of a book on tape, and that helps me. I've listened to over 500 novels that way. But so when I pulled the car over, I turned off the tape because I had to go out and take care of the engine. And the radio station that happened to be on was a classical music station, and the chirping stopped. And I was shocked. I was wondering if music made calm them down, and so I turned the channel to a country and western, and they started chirping. So I went right back to classical, and we listened to Beethoven and Mozart on the way home and the rest of the trip. Actually, at night I put on a classical CD in it, and it really calmed them down. So that was something that I learned. They would sit in my little back storeroom. And then I would bring them to school, and they would be in the classroom, and then I'd bring them back home again. They would like to sit on top of everything in the room. I had to put newspapers down everywhere. Elwood particularly liked to sit on my phone that was in the room, and he would sit and chirp and perch right on top of the phone. They grew, and they gained some weight, and they got a little bit older, although Jake didn't as well. He wasn't growing as fast. He wasn't developing his muscles as quickly. His brother picked on him a bit, so I had to separate the two. And then one day while I was taking Elwood out, Jake decided to try and escape the cage and fly on his own, and so he ended up falling down and breaking his neck, and the poor thing just didn't make it. So he died, and so that left me with just Elwood. But Elwood did get better and stronger, and and grew, and the summer school was over with, and I brought him home, and I had a big cage that I had made for him as he got bigger and stronger, and eventually it came to the point where I had to let him go, and I knew that it was kind of time to go, and it was a little bit tricky. I mean, he was very used to me. He would take food from my hand. He would sit on my shoulder. He would he was very much tame, and I was worried about that in terms of letting him go. If he was too tame, if he would fly into a truck or something thinking it was me driving, or something like that. But I decided that it was time to do it, and so I brought him out to my favorite tree in my backyard, and I opened up the cage, and I said, "Okay, Elwood, take off." And he sat there and looked at me like I was nuts, and so I reached in and put him up into the tree, and he sat there in the tree and looked down at me and said, "Are you crazy?" And then jumped right back into the cage again. So I eventually had to take him, and I threw him up into the tree, and then I closed the cage, and then he took off, and eventually he flew away, and I was really pretty sad, to see him fly away, not knowing whether I'm ever going to see him again. And as he was flying down across the neighbors' houses, he got higher and higher, and he circled back, and then he ended up on my roof. And then he started screaming, scared to death because he had never been that high before, and I had to go get a ladder and go up there and pull him down again. But little by little, he did learn to fly and fly high and so on. But he spent most of the rest of the time, the end of the summer and the fall, in our backyard, flying around. My neighbor was really shocked when one time he was sitting up in a telephone pole, and I snapped my fingers and called to him, and he flew right down and landed on my finger. And the neighbor didn't know about all this, and so he almost fainted. But he used to sit on a banister, or he would sit on the air conditioning unit in the window and watch Oprah with my wife. And my wife would turn over and look, and there's Elwood looking at her, and then just going back and watching television. He was very pleased to do this. One day, my daughter was over, and there was a knock on the door, and she said, "There's something at your door." And I said, "Oh, don't worry, that's Elwood." And she said, "Elwood's a bird." And we said, "Go look." And so she opened the door, and there's Elwood with something in his mouth, dropping it down. Sometimes it was a nut or a stick or a bottle cap or whatever, and he would present it and then fly away. So it was kind of a nesting behavior. He was presenting stuff to nest. He didn't realize that we weren't birds, And then one day I was working in the backyard, and my phone started ringing in my garage. The problem is I don't have a phone in my garage. So I went in there, and there's Elwood sitting there chirping like my phone. Back when he was growing up, he learned that when the phone rang, I would come into the room. So he learned to mimic the phone, and it was exactly the same sound, same tones, same spacing. It was amazing. So I looked that up, and it ends up that blue jays have been known to mimic even human voice. They can mimic sounds. They're very screechy, loud birds, but they can mimic sounds. I was absolutely amazed. My son was over one time, and the phone started ringing, and he says, "When did you get a phone in your garage?" I said, "Go look." And he comes out going, "No way." Everybody was shocked to hear about that. Well, Elwood stuck around, but little by little we saw less and less of him. And eventually, towards the end of the fall, we just didn't see him anymore. And I didn't know what happened to him. I don't know if he had flown into a truck or if a cat had gotten him or whatever. But we kept on looking in the trees, and he was pretty much gone. And then I got a card, and it said, "Dear Mom and Dad, I had a wonderful trip down to Florida. We'll see you in the spring. Love, Elwood." It was sent by my son and daughter-in-law in Buffalo Grove, but it was very cute. And it did get me to thinking that, yeah, he probably did migrate, because they migrate south for the winter, and then they come back in the spring. So the next spring, I guess I was constantly looking at the trees and looking for Elwood. And one day, a blue jay showed up on my tree in the front, not my favorite tree in the back. And he was hopping up and down and screeching. And so I'm going out there going, "Elwood, Elwood." Well, he wouldn't come by me, but he did stick around, and he would fly goofy. He would land on our banister in the back, and he would sit. But when I got too close to him, he'd fly away. But he did constantly come back to the banister, and I'm just wondering, is this Elwood or is this not Elwood? And then we noticed that there were two of them. So if it was Elwood, he had a girlfriend. And then eventually they produced 3 baby blue jays. But Elwood, or this blue jay, did fly kind of goofy. He flew up and down like he was hopping from desk to desk. And I kind of convinced myself that it was Elwood. But at one point, I was sitting on the porch looking at that tree, and I just kind of sighed, and I said, well, I'm never going to really know if that really is Elwood, and I'm thinking I'm just convincing myself that it's Elwood. But I'm never going to really know whatever happened to Elwood. And then my phone started ringing up in the tree. Elwood really did come back and stuck around for about 3 or 4 years. And then we just had other blue jays that were there, Elwood's sons and grandsons and so on. But that is an absolute true story of Elwood.